Wonderful. Let's see. What can I tell? That light is right in my eye.
They want it that way.
Oh, okay.
It's unfortunate.
Oh, the lights?
Well, it's just,
It's for the Zoom.
okay.
It's a challenge, but there you are.
I just, so low tech, I don't know these things.
So welcome those of you at the Nalanda Event Center and those of you online. I brought reinforcements because this conversation, which is a 43-year or so later reprise of our Christian Buddhist dialogues that happened at Naropa, happened while Judy was sitting in the office where I sit right now, and so she can actually talk about what happened over the 5 years and where she overlapped. It's a real joy to welcome Tessa back to Naropa after a long time. We have the privilege of Tessa staying at our house, so we're learning a lot about what happened over the last 4 decades to each other, and we think we're telling each other the truth, but we're not exactly sure. I think it's good. And for Judith to come back, Judith never quite has left Naropa, which is fantastic, and so comes back for kind of these moments that are important as we're celebrating our 50th anniversary and going forward into the next 50, and to be fortunate enough for us to have faculty who were here then and are here now, who can kind of draw the line and actually shine a bit of a light, shine a bit of a light into the next several decades in the future. And so welcome to both of you. We're grateful that that you're here, and really happy. Thank you to Nathaniel and Karis for pulling this together with the Wisdom Traditions Department. This is sort of the dream of Naropa, is to be able to bring this interfaith dialogue together. So thank you, and I'll ask Judy to fill in what I've left out.
I don't think you left anything out, but I'll fill in anyway. I just wanted to say a few words because I'm so thrilled to have Tessa back at Naropa for this extended stay. And as Chuck mentioned, I first met Tessa at the Buddhist-Christian conferences. The first one was in 1981, and I can't remember how many we had. We had a number of them.
We had 7 over 10 years.
Yeah. Anyway, so it's always been a value to try to bring true contemplatives together from a variety of traditions and try to provide support and learning from one another in dialogue, which is so important that people have different imaging, different languaging, but there are so many connections, especially from the contemplative practitioners' perspectives. So they've been delightful events. And I particularly remember the first one, in 1981, we spent a day with the faculty together trying to, get to know each other and everything. And there was a sea of men in robes, many, many men in robes of various types. And then a couple of a beautiful young woman and a friend, a woman, Judith, and myself. And we were like the triangle of femininity in the conference. And since that time, I haven't had as much contact with Tessa, but we've sort of run into each other from here and there, because I lived in Nova Scotia for quite a while, and was lucky enough to visit the Hermitage there in Nova Scotia and visit Tessa there, and then of course she's come back to Naropa a couple of times, but it's a rare treat, and so I hope you appreciate how wonderful it is to be able to spend time with someone who's deeply steeped in a tradition of Christian contemplation and who's deeply curious and informed about the many traditions, sister and brother traditions of contemplative practices. So it's a treat to have you. Thank you.
It's so wonderful, Tessa, to have you here, as Judy and Chuck have said. And so we we had lunch the other day and agreed that we were sort of two old broads talking about the past. But I wanted to ask a couple of questions about your memories from that time, because I certainly remember your bursting in onto the scene of our dialogues in those days, as Judy described, with lots of men in robes, both Christian and Buddhist, and the kind of refreshing, earthy, joyful presence that you brought to our very first conference, and your return for another, I think 4 or 5 of them.
Yeah, all but one.
All but one,
Yeah.
yes. So we had conferences every year, the 81 through 86, and then we skipped a year and we had another one in 1988. So you came to all but one of those, and you were one of the anchoring people in what unfolded to be a very intimate relationship between people who came to know each other through dialogue. So first of all, let me ask, how did you happen to be the representative of your community? There were other people who could have come, but I know there's a story behind how you happened to be the one.
Yes, I was not invited. Can you hear me all right? I'm not
You have to put it closer.
closer.
If you
Okay.
think karaoke, you probably don't do a lot of karaoke,
Okay,
but
I'd like to, though.
okay.
So now, okay? Yeah, I was not invited. So if I hadn't come, it would have been all men of the major speakers. And it was my root teacher, my abbot, Father William McNamara, who was invited, and he got sick. And so he asked me to do it. And I was horrified. And I said, no, please do not ask me to do this. I don't know anything about Buddhism, and I don't even like Buddhism. And he started to laugh, and he said, Tessa, you need the humiliation. And so I came under obedience, and it was humiliating. It was extremely difficult for lots of reasons, which I think we can unpack as we go along. And it was a life-changing experience for which I am enormously grateful. So that ever since 1991, it was really a trial by fire, is how I describe that experience I had that first year.
1981.
1981. And ever since, I have had this profound heart connection to Naropa, because as difficult as it was so life-giving for me that over the years, even before I ever came back after the dialogues, anytime I met anybody who had any connection with Naropa, I would actually have a visceral, I could feel the warmth coursing through my whole being for Naropa. It was just that important to me. So, you know, anytime Naropa says, invites me to come to something, you know, I'm in. And after meeting the students that I have met this week, I'm like 1,000% in. Very grateful to all of you that I've met and talked with this week. You have really fed me and inspired me, and you're doing a great job, Chuck, because just amazing students. So
it was new for all of us as well.
Yes.
This was Rinpoche's vision of bringing together people from Christianity and Buddhism, from diverse Christian traditions and diverse Buddhist traditions, not to do theology, not to try to convert each other, but to talk deeply from our hearts about practice.
Yes.
And so the focus on practice made it a very special and unusual. I mean, other observers of the dialogue said this was the first kind of dialogue like this, where contemplatives got together and spoke from their practice experience without that kind of competitive, dogmatic approach that a lot of dialogue situations had been. So, and the dialogues were not held on Naropa's campus, because at that point we didn't have a campus. We got a campus a little later, but in 1981, the very first of these conferences happened at the Boulder Shambhala Center, which very ornately painted. If you've never been there, it is a traditional Buddhist meditation center, Tibetan Buddhist shrine room. And I remember people coming in to attend the dialogue who were coming for the first time. And I remember sitting near the entrance, and a woman said to her husband, "Well, it sort of looks like your really fancy Chinese restaurant here."
Yeah.
People had never been in a space like that. So I'm wondering, what were your first impressions?
Exactly that, except there was another component. I said, whoa, this looks like a cross between a Chinese restaurant and a pagan temple, is what I said in my ignorance. And so the first thing that struck me was the huge tanka, the painting of Vajradharu, who was blue. That was quite startling, the size of it, the blueness. And I'll say more about that because I really came to love that tanka. And the second thing I saw was this fierce, black-faced, I think, were there arms? No arms, all right, just face. Goddess, I thought it was a goddess, on top of a bunch of skulls, which to me was quite startling and very, it was pretty scary. And I didn't understand it, but that was what
A protector shrine, a traditional Tibetan-style protector shrine.
I said, what is a nice Catholic girl like me doing in a place like this? Those were my honest and ignorant and initial responses. And I just need to be honest about that. It was like nothing I'd ever experienced. But I didn't so explain what that was, because I didn't know what that little shrine was.
Well, this was a Mahakala shrine, which is all about protection of the place of practice and protection of the teachings. It comes from the Tibetan tradition of creating a very fierce protective boundary so that people who are practicing within the shrine room aren't being attacked by things from the outside, that they can actually settle down and practice. And it's all about the transmutation of aggression and intense sort of wrath into a peaceful place of practice. But no one explained that to you, obviously.
No. Well, no one prepared us for anything. But you also told me the other day, Tibetans themselves wouldn't be seeing this. You told me.
In many of the Tibetan temples in Tibet that I've visited, the protector shrine is off in a closed-off place, not for most people who come to the shrine room. So, yes.
So my response would be a typical Tibetan response.
For a layperson, yes.
For a layperson.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it did its work of keeping away anything that's sort of not practice-oriented in that space.
Yeah.
Yes. So beyond the impression of the space, what else did you notice when you came?
Well, of course I noticed I was the youngest. I was 37. That's not exactly young, but in the context, I felt like a child. So that was hard. And now Judy Leaf was on some panels eventually. Judith moderated a bit, but I was the only woman for several years. And this was difficult for me because I think men and women approach this differently. I think women tend to speak more from the heart, and I think I do it even more readily. perhaps too readily. And I had a lot of frustration. I wanted more. I wanted more on the feeling level. I wanted more of, well, what is it really like for you? And I did find both the Christian men and the Buddhist men a little too heady for me, even though we were supposed to be practice-oriented. And the person who really helped me, and it wasn't until, I forget, I've been trying to track, because I've saved every brochure from every one of the conferences, and I'm trying to track, well, who came when. That was another frustration, that I wanted it to be the same people every year so we could keep going deeper and deeper and deeper. And there were a few of us who continued year after year, but not everyone. And so then you'd be starting over again, which I found difficult. I wanted to press further. So whatever year it was that Joseph Goldstein came, he was extremely helpful to me. And he said to me, you know, Tessa, you're attributing the difficulties you're having, you're thinking it's Christian Buddhist, that Christians are more vulnerable and speak more from the heart than Buddhists. He said, no, what you're suffering from, the women in my community also suffer from and criticize me for. It's a man-woman thing. It's not a Buddhist-Christian thing. That was extremely enlightening, extremely helpful, very helpful.
So I remember that in your earliest presentations, there were two particular presentations that stood out to me, and it stood out to my students from reading the book that it is based on the conferences. And some of you in your classes have read this book, Speaking of Silence. When you talked about bridal mysticism, for one thing, my understanding is the Carmelites come from a completely different branch of monasticism than the Cistercians do.
Absolutely.
And so the way that you spoke with this kind of emotional, embodied, earthy, experiential quality was shocking to some of the others who weren't used to that kind of presentation. So can you share with people here what you meant by bridal mysticism?
Yes, and I have talked a bit this week to some of the students about it. So it's not relegated to the Carmelite mystical tradition, because you see it in other traditions as well. Now, St. Bernard of Clairvaux was a Cistercian, but he was a bridal mystic, and some of the most beautiful writing on bridal mysticism comes from Bernard, so that's interesting. But for example, God bless Father Thomas Keating, who was the Cistercian at our conferences. He was not a bridal mystic by any means.
Can you say what you mean by bridal mysticism?
What I mean by that, yes, what I mean by that is, and another word for it, because bridal may be misleading, is spousal mysticism. So there are, first of all, as a Christian, I need to speak about God, but not God as entity or person, God as kind of a shorthand word for that ineffable mystery. But Carmelites, your experience of God mystically, you could be experiencing God as father, mother, brother, friend, and you see that in the whole tradition. For Carmelites, it's even more intimate, and it's a spousal relationship, a very intense, passionate spousal relationship. And
a bit shocking to our Cistercian brothers in the
yes.
conference. Yes.
Well, yes, and I even remember the. I remember there's a film of a dialogue between Father Thomas Keating and Rabbi Zalman Schachter, and this would not be foreign to Jewish mysticism. And when Judith and I were on a panel for a memorial after Reb Zalman died. And for those of you who don't know, he was a wisdom chair here at Naropa for years. And so Reb Zalman says, well, I'd like to talk about the kiss. I'd like to talk about the kiss of God.
Right.
And you see Father Thomas kind of blanch almost and say, the kiss. Yes, the kiss. It's really quite amusing to me. Cistercian spirituality is wonderful, but it's just very different. And Father Thomas was a very powerful force in those dialogues, but we were kind of at opposite ends of the spectrum of the Christian mystical tradition. So the Song of Songs, the Kiss of God would be very familiar to me and to Carmelite spousal mystics, spousal contemplatives. But that is not something that everyone in the Christian tradition would not only not experience, but not even be interested in or go for. It's just a particular flavor for those of us of a certain temperament. That's where we go. So, but what amazed me was how interested all of you Naropa Buddhists were in that. And that first talk I gave, the whole thing was printed verbatim in the newspaper then, what was called, the Nalanda Sun or Vajradhatu Sun?
Yes.
And my entire talk, we just went on pages and pages and pages because of how interested you all were. Well, and what I want to know is why? Because you never revealed why.
Well, we never asked. So now we can talk about it.
Now we can talk about it.
I think it's because Vajrayana Buddhism, on which our tradition is based, is about using everything in human life as part of our spirituality, including passion. And so the transmutation of passion is very much at the heart of the very lively, rich, embodied kind of spirituality that you expressed. There was a lot of resonance that comes from people who practice Tibetan Buddhism and who have learned about how we work with emotions, and that emotions aren't considered negative or problematic, but are transformed through the practice. There's wisdom at the heart of every emotion. And when you began to talk, we realized there's a Vajrayana Christianity. So this kind of resonance that came back and forth was because for most of us, we had not encountered that kind of Christianity before. It was really wonderful. And that was part of the joy of having you come back over and over to begin to share more and more theologically and experientially what Carmelite mysticism was like.
Yeah, that's really fascinating because, now see, and if I don't even know that male, like Father William wouldn't have talked so much that way as a man. I'm not sure he would have.
I was going to ask you, do you think that you spoke more that way because as a woman in a female body?
As a woman in a female body, and then there are differing streams within the Carmelite tradition. And well, yes, John of the Cross was also a bridal mystic. But Saint Teresa of Avila was really out there with it.
Yes.
And she's my namesake. My real name is Teresa, so she's my patron saint. She's my namesake. She's my favorite saint, and in many ways my best woman friend. For years I felt closer to her than any woman I knew in the flesh. So. She had a profound influence on me, so we can even talk about Teresian Carmelite spirituality because she's so different from John of the Cross, even though his poetry, the spiritual canticle, so then he rewrote the Song of Songs, and titled his poem The Spiritual Canticle. And he was very much a bridal mystic as well, a spousal mystic as well, but a little more restrained than Teresa.
So the beauty of that embodied in a monastic life was part of the fascination that we had as Vajrayana Buddhist practitioners of being a sister in Christianity who is practicing something very resonant to some of the themes in Tibetan Buddhism.
You know, one of the things I also remember from those early years, because I would, to this day, I don't understand a lot of what happened. I mean, I'm still unpacking 43 years later. I'm still meditating on this whole experience and trying to understand. But I remember a conversation we had where because there wasn't a lot of open talk about your practices, I was kind of lumping all the Buddhisms together.
Yes.
In my ignorance, and Eido Roshi was particularly powerful presence, and there's a certain quality in Zen, and I remember saying something like, my image of Buddhism, lumping everyone together, was a perfect white peony. Do you remember that conversation?
I vaguely do.
And you said, "Oh no, this is not Tibetan Buddhism." And I forget where we were, but there was a painting on the wall of a vase of very wild, beautifully colored zinnias. And you pointed to that and you said, "That's Vajrayana Buddhism, not that perfect white
it
peony."
could include a lovely white peony
Yes,
too.
yes. But
Yes.
there was this other part.
That's
I
right.
was being exclusive and saying, you know, this is what it is. It wasn't that still white perfection isn't part of it, but I was limiting it to that.
Yes.
And I'll never forget, you're pointing to that painting and saying, "Oh no, that's our practice."
Well, we were learning so much about each other during
Yeah.
that time, and there was such an unfolding. Also, I think as we talked the other day, and we talked back in those days about how long it took to find a common language.
Yeah.
We found that we were using the words meditation and contemplation in reversed ways.
Exactly.
So we probably spent 2 years of the conference talking past each other.
Exactly. Yeah, I remember, so we used to go before the actual dialogues, we would go up to, at that time, well, was it called Rocky Mountain Dharma Center
Yes,
then? But
it's
there
the
was
Shambhala
nothing, there
Mountain
was
Center.
nothing there. It was just, we were just intense. Dialogue, just getting to know one another intense. And I know because I was so ignorant, I wanted to clarify some terms, but nobody else wanted to do that.
People were pretending that we were all on the same page.
And I needed some basic foundation because I knew nothing. Anyway, you're right. So for Christians, meditation is a preparatory practice that you do intentionally and even within your control until the contemplative experience takes over, and you used exactly the opposite. For you, it was exactly the opposite.
Yes.
So for a long time, I couldn't understand what people were talking about.
And we all didn't understand each
Yeah.
other, but that helped so much.
Yeah, when we
and
got to that
it's
point.
helped both of us, I know, in dialogue since.
Yeah.
So I wanted to go back to another one of your compelling presentations from the early conferences, and that is your depiction of prayer as a long, loving look at the real. And when you gave that talk and spoke of prayer that way, it had such a ripple through all of us listening to you say that, a long, loving look at the real. Can you unpack that phrase?
Yeah, so it's actually a description more of what contemplation is, that you begin with a long, loving look at the real, small r, and that means anything. And that leads you, if you are looking long and lovingly enough, to a long, loving look at the real capital R, which, from my point of view, would be God. And that was one of the more original descriptions of contemplation that we learned from Father William. I'm very, very fond of that as a description of what contemplation is.
And there's so many parallels in that to aspects of Buddhist meditation. When we talk about vipassana, which is insight meditation, is about seeing things as they are.
Okay.
And the loving part would be not so Buddhist to say, but that quality of genuine curiosity and appreciation is definitely part of
Yeah.
it. So anything more that is this a phrase that you still use?
I do. I prefer now, there's two other ways I now, because I don't want to limit it to look.
Using the other sense perceptions too?
Well, so yes, so I prefer to describe contemplation now as, and I'll qualify this, if I were speaking only to Christians, I would say loving experiential awareness of God. And the most important word is experiential, because we're talking about experience. And that's kind of a major flaw in the whole history of Christianity, is that we have not, we've lost the contemplative dimension, the mystical dimension, the experiential dimension, and it's been reduced to talk, ideas, and not experience.
Yes.
And the heart of it, the heart of the Christian thing is experience. So that word experiential is very important. It's interesting that you said the loving part would not be.
We wouldn't use that word.
You wouldn't use that word, and here I am using it again. That the love word is very important, because it's all about a love affair. The other description that I'm even more fond of using, and again I got this from Father William, he described God as the only way I would ever describe God, using capital P's, personal, passionate presence. Mm-hmm. And that our response to that is our own personal, passionate presence, small p's. And if you asked me, so that would be how I would describe who God is if you forced me to do that. And what do I experience? I experience personal, passionate presence. It's just a sense of presence that never goes away. And that's what I think the awareness is about.
Yes.
Loving experiential awareness. And I think that works. You leave off the of God. I guess we'll leave off the loving, just in the definition.
Don't leave it off. It's nice.
Okay, well, but that it's experiential awareness that's like, a total awareness that does involve all of the senses, which is why I love the altars that you make.
We do the senses well, don't you think?
Oh, you do the senses beautifully, and that was one of the things that astounded me that first year, because we spent a lot of time going into people's homes, and everybody had an altar, which I thought was extraordinary. And I was just fascinated. They were sometimes done differently, but it was the five senses.
Yes.
And that's big. That's another big theme for me, is the five senses. Like whenever I'm studying the mystics, I pull out every passage I can find that talks in terms of any of the five senses. And my favorite mystic, my favorite saint is Teresa of Avila, but my favorite mystical passage comes from St. Augustine, in which he describes his experience of God in all the five senses. And I meant to memorize that before I came, because I knew I wanted to say that, and I didn't.
You can do it tomorrow.
Okay, I'll do it tomorrow.
In Buddhism also, particularly in our lineage, there's a lot of emphasis on experience. And if you think about understanding as more sort of intellectual, as maybe the way first people come to learn about the Buddhist teachings, then it moves to experiential, and then it moves to realization. So the emphasis on realization might be something that is a conversation here.
Yeah, so you're saying intellectual,
Experiential realization, which is a more non-dual experience.
Yeah, I
yes.
think that's. I collect. I used to use the word stages of growth. There are a lot of schemas in the Christian mystical tradition.
In Tibetan Buddhism as well.
And I'm a one on the Enneagram. I love schemas. I love order. I love lists. And so I collect different interpretations of well, what is this all about? That's a very good one. I'm going to write that down.
Great. Let's see. The Naropa dialogues opened a lot of doors for you to other dialogues and other. I mean, before that, you were much more in a hermitage.
I was hidden away. Yeah.
You were hidden away, and
Yeah,
then suddenly you were discovered and you were out and about. I'm wondering, how did the Naropa dialogues prepare you for going out? And when you went out to other places, what was different than the Naropa dialogues? What was perhaps what could we learn from your experience of going to other dialogues, I guess is my question.
I don't think nothing was as personal or intimate. A lot of time, the part of the problem is it would be on a conference level where, you're doing talks, you're not really exchanging.
Yes.
You might exchange behind the scenes. I think
Sage on the stage model, right?
Yeah. Sage on the stage.
A little bit like this.
Yeah. And that's another reason I was so grateful to Naropa, because I was living this very hidden life, and those dialogues were a big deal that got tremendous publicity because it was a pioneer dialogue.
And we had a real turnout, like 300 or more people each time, and it grew in popularity.
Grew.
Yes.
So
And 5 days long.
Yeah, they were
the
exhausting.
public part were 5 days long.
Exhausting. Because I made the mistake of thinking, and I was interested because I was so ignorant. So I went to everything. And you just couldn't do that. There was just too much. But then I became, because there weren't a lot, and at that time, there weren't a lot of women Christian teachers. I didn't consider myself a teacher. I was just a contemplative. But then I just kept getting all these invitations, and it just opened up a whole world. I guess what I would like to say, and it wasn't that I learned it all, like at the beginning of those dialogues. As I said, I've been unpacking this for decades, the last 4 decades. Here's what I think I learned most of all.
Yes.
The first thing I learned it intellectually before I came. And my friend Father Dave, because I was so terrified, my friend Father Dave Denny, who's here in the back row, said, why don't you look at Ramon Panikar to get yourself ready. I do not recommend that you read him. I can't understand a word of his writing. He's so complex. Dave would understand him and interpret him for me. but as a person, he was amazing, and I was
Yes.
with him in 2 different dialogues, and then visited him at his home outside of Barcelona. And he's one of the first. He's a pioneer Christian in dialogue, and he was now deceased. He was the son of an Indian Hindu father and a Roman Catholic Spanish mother. So in his very body was dialogue going on. Anyway, his teaching was that when we go to dialogue, we have to be vulnerable to conversion. Mm-hmm. And what he meant by that is not that I'm going to become a Buddhist, but because I have encountered Buddhists and Buddhism, I can never again be the same kind of Christian. And that definitely happened.
Yes.
Because the big thing was just opening. I want to come back to that and something that is in here about you and dialogue. So that was the first thing. The second thing was just broad theme of differences. So my experience was, first you experience differences and it's like, whoa, we are so different, and whoa, this is scary. Then you get deeper and you say, oh, we're not so different after all. But the best is then you come back to, we are different, and that's just fine. And it's about not merely tolerating those differences, but celebrating those differences. And I think that's very, very important.
Yes.
That we don't just mishmash, that we recognize, here's you, and here I am, there are these differences, and there was this phrase, I don't know where I ever heard it, the tang of otherness. and of course it's oneness, but never losing that sense of otherness and differences, and this is a good thing. The third thing is, what is that? Oh, I learned here, because you had that, I loved it. Although I think I've only remembered it in the last few years and have been thinking about it, you used to often say, I say you, I mean the Naropa gang, soft front, strong back.
Yeah.
And I think that is a beautiful description of how we move into dialogue. We need the strong back of our own tradition. We need to be strong in our own tradition, and we need to love it and be secure in it, and then have that soft front that's vulnerable to conversion, and we bring both of those into dialogue. That's those 3 things I would say I think are the most important elements to bring into the world of dialogue.
Something else that Panikar writes about is the importance of recognizing that when we're in dialogue with each other and we encounter the other in the other, we also discover the other inside. And the kind of inner dialogue that takes place when you meet someone who is an exclusivist, thinking theirs is the only right tradition, sometimes we react to people who are, rejecting anyone who's different, but then we meet our own exclusivist within. We begin to discover we have that in ourselves as well. And the powerful thing about dialogue is we find out parts of ourselves that we may have missed. Almost like finding a Christian within, so beginning to feel the complexity and richness of dialogue for bringing out the various aspects of oneself that then creates a very rich exchange that otherwise we might have missed.
Yeah, we might have missed.
I do think that for myself as a Buddhist who's done lots and lots of dialogue, that I've developed a much more nuanced and rich depth of my Buddhism as a result of incorporating lots of different perspectives along the way by encountering the exclusivists within or the namby-pamby within or whatever,
Yeah.
you know, all of that. It's very rich.
And also from another perspective, that I think part of what happens in dialogue is that we see manifested in the other tradition aspects of our own tradition that have not been emphasized enough.
Yes.
And I think one of the great benefits of Christian Buddhist dialogue over the decades has been a revival of the Christian contemplative tradition, because it was always there. It's the heart of the tradition, but it has been eclipsed. And because of the rise of Buddhism and the popularity of Buddhism and meditation and contemplative practice, then it made Christians go back and look and say, whoa, you know, we have that in our tradition as well. And so I think a part of the revival of Christian contemplative life is because of exchanges with the
Can I ask you a
Buddhists.
personal question?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, in your own spiritual life, the impact of the dialogues on your own life of prayer.
Well, I would just emphasize the heart opening. That it isn't that I wanted to be narrow or closed or in a bubble, but I realized how much I was. And I probably would have stayed there if I hadn't been forced out. Maybe not, but that's what's so beautiful about it. And I noticed in the Tannel's article in the Naropa magazine for the 50th anniversary, because I talked to Nathaniel's interspirituality class about the dialogues, and then you did too, and you said that part of the value for you was it kept you from becoming a provincial Buddhism, a provincial Buddha.
Yeah, provincial
Buddhist,
yes.
yeah, that was it.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So I think we had the same experience.
Yes.
That,
That's what I was sort of looking for.
yeah, that
Yes.
any one of us, you know, you get so comfortable in your bubble.
And you can become dogmatic without realizing it.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think
absolutely.
that one of the incredible things about dialogue is developing much greater curiosity when you encounter something in someone else's tradition. With you, the quality of heart that you brought in those conferences, I think had all of us looking at our own hearts in that way.
Yeah.
Also, speaking as a woman in a tradition which is so patriarchal, cultivated the female voice in all women practitioners, I think. So I think that was a beneficial thing for all of us.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you can see. And we became friends.
Yes.
That's not that it was all, maybe we should talk about some of the other difficulties. Like,
I'd
think,
like to hear about that.
okay. Those of you that I've talked to during the week, this is going to be repetitious for you, but one of the things that shocked me was I had had a very positive experience all my life of the Christian tradition. I kind of joke and say I never went to Catholic schools, and that may account for it. So I had no nun horror stories. Everything had been very, very positive for me. Also, here's just two interesting things. I grew up Polish American. I went to a Polish church. I grew up in the 40s, 50s. Everything was either in Polish or Latin. So my mind was bypassed all those years of going to Mass. And I was imbibing something on a whole other level, which I think was part of my being prepared for a contemplative life. But I had no horror stories. My experience was all positive. And the audience, well, not only the audience, but some of the dialoguers were former Christians with negative experiences who had left and now were Buddhists. They left on the Sunday school level, and now they were engaged in very sophisticated, advanced, contemplative Buddhist studies. So they were dismissive of Christianity as this infantile, lesser tradition. I found that difficult. Just like one example, I got into a discussion over lunch. It was twice in the dialogues. Usually I was scared, but I was usually calm, but twice my blood boiled. And this was the first time, and someone said, somehow the Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis came up, and the person who was a former Christian said, I'm sure that C.S. Lewis was a secret Buddhist practitioner. And I said, well, why are you saying that? And the person said, well, because of all the lion imagery. And my blood boiled. We were at a point where it was okay if I raised my voice. I mean, I'm sorry I did, but I did raise my voice. And I said, you just can't accept that there could be anything, good or advanced unless it's Buddhism. I mean, I was just shocked at this because seemingly ignorant of the whole tradition in Judaism and Christianity of the lion as a symbol of the divine. So that was just one little example. So there was that, and it took me several years of the dialogue to realize that this is what was happening, that people were comparing on two different levels. And finally I understood it and said, if you're going to do Sunday school Christianity, you better do Sunday school Buddhism. And if you're going to do sophisticated, advanced, contemplative Buddhism, then that's the Christianity you need to be doing. But people were ignorant of the whole tradition. So that was one thing that was very hard. The other thing was what I ended up calling, so that was what I called it reverse triumphalism. And because Christians historically have just been triumphalists, we're right, we have the truth, you're wrong. So I felt there was some justice in it even. I was willing, I was kind of willing to take that on and say, well, I deserve this, we deserve this, because that's how we used to be. Not only used to be. But then the other thing that got me was the pain among the people who had formerly been Christians or Jews, how wounded people had been by the tradition. And this was a complete surprise to me. Talk about a bubble. So what happened, and I have a question for you about this. There was tremendous projection going on, and suddenly I was kind of the target for a lot of hostility because people were reacting out of their pain. And this was startling to me. Before I ask the question, I want to say this, but this was another huge opening for me, so that I came to the dialogues as much to dialogue with Buddhists. I came as much to bring another face of the Christian tradition to people that could be healing because it was very different. And there was a funny moment. This is one of my favorite moments. One of the participants or the audience, whatever we called the people, stood up and said, "Are you a heretic?" And because they had never heard, and this was so startling to me because I was speaking Orthodox Christian mysticism, but they had no idea. And so they thought I was a heretic. And so this was the second year. This was 82, I remember, because Thomas Keating wasn't at the first dialogue. So it was Thomas Keating, Brother David Steindl-Rast, and then a very strict Russian Orthodox priest, Father Thomas Hopko. And I said, well, let's have a heresy trial. And so I asked them, am I Orthodox or do I need to be burned at the stake? And it was just a lot of fun because, one by one it was, she's Orthodox, she's Orthodox, she's Orthodox. And that was a peak moment. That was an enormous teaching tool, I think. But why do you think there were other Christians there? There were these powerful men. Why was I the one that was being projected on and that got kind
You
of the
spoke
grief?
the language of emotions.
Yes, that's what I think too.
And you were you were a woman, and so you were less threatening.
Yeah.
And you were someone they felt they could confide their deepest pain with. But definitely.
Yeah, I thought it was because I was a woman with my heart on my sleeve. And that was a huge thing for me.
And I think maybe some of the men may have felt similarly that they were targeted and that there were things, but they were more experienced in dialogue than you.
Yes, they certainly were.
Anyway, I think, though, that was my impression.
But that was very, very important.
Yeah.
How about that? I just think we should mention Vivekananda. Do you wanted to go talk about Vivekananda?
What do you remember about him? I knew him before the conference. I knew him after. So,
oh, you did? Okay.
Yes.
Well, I never heard anything about him after. You need to tell me later about him after. So my first dialogue partner was a very...
a tiny little Theravada monk.
A Theravadan monk from
Denver.
From Sri Lanka.
Yes.
He was like a Baptist preacher.
That's how he was trained to teach.
That's what I learned, but I didn't know. So he's my first dialogue.
Your first one-on-one with a Buddhist.
My first one-on-one with a Buddhist.
And did he sit with his eyes closed?
That's not the part. I don't remember anything but this one vivid thing. He started preaching about sex. And he had this thing. His big line, which brought down the house, was he was going on and on about mindfulness. We have to be mindful all the time. Mindful on the toilet and mindful eating and everything. And you can't have mindful sex. And he said, and if you think you can have mindful sex, you just go home tonight and you try it. And the whole place went into convulsive laughter, and I'm just sitting there, and I'm supposed to be dialoguing with him. And I just remember I said, I feel like the straight man here. It was It was just wild. And then later I learned that there is this whole tradition of street preaching in Buddhism. I had no idea.
In certain cultures, and in his culture, that is how he was taught to be a Dharma teacher. Yes.
Yeah. So that was like, whoa.
And in dyads, he had been trained to close his eyes and just be mindful while someone spoke with him.
well,
So again, his training and very strict sense of monastic discipline, celibacy.
Yes.
Meaning you can't look at women, you can't have any contact with women.
Yeah.
A very specific
Yeah.
tradition. Yes.
He just was, it was just such a shock. And in
he's
that
such
context,
a sweetheart.
Yeah.
I had him come to classes. We went to his temple. I got to know him.
I never heard anything about him
Yes.
after that. It was my only, it
Yes.
was my only encounter, and it was like, whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's that. Well, I'm
He
glad to
probably
hear
has
that.
an impact on his community.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I think it's probably time for us to open to questions from the audience and try to find out what it is you would like to ask or comment on or talk about. We have a microphone over here, and if you have a question or comment, it would be really helpful if you could go to the microphone so that our people online could see you and hear you. Thank you. And do tell us your name.
Hi, I'm Eunice. I'm a guest for tonight. I wanted to ask, I was kind of left curious with where y'all sort of ended up on what is meditation and what is contemplation.
That's a great question. So what is meditation? What is contemplation?
I don't think we ended up there did we in the dialogues ever?
Yes, I think so, but mostly in the private dialogues at Rocky Mountain Dharma Center.
Yeah.
And I think we got to being on the same page. So maybe
Yeah,
I could take a
why don't
stab
you- I
at
would
it
like
and you
you.
see whether
Yeah,
you
no, you do.
agree. In Buddhism, contemplation has the connotation of contemplating a scripture or contemplating a thought or contemplating a particular object of meditation in a particular way. And many compassion practices, for example, are contemplation practices where you contemplate someone and then you send loving kindness practice to them or whatever. And then meditation practice, more commonly, is spoken of in Buddhism as not with a particular object that you're contemplating, except perhaps breathing, contemplating, meditating on the breath or meditating on a particular object. But contemplation has a kind of intellectual, thought-related element. And in Buddhist training, contemplation is often preparation for a meditation session of some kind. Yeah. And we learned that contemplation is used in an opposite way in the Christian tradition.
Exactly the opposite. That meditation is a mental exercise of meditating on a scripture, meditating on a piece of music, meditating on an object, and contemplation is when all that ceases and the whole experience of the divine takes over.
So you can imagine that after a couple of years of conversation about meditation, we weren't talking about the same thing at all. Yeah. And once we figured that out, things began to improve.
Yeah.
Yes, others, if you have, it doesn't have to be a question, an observation, or something you'd like to share from your experience. You can turn that mic toward you a little bit. There. Great. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sean.
Sean.
I think what really piqued my interest was you guys were talking about the differences between the two traditions and what you celebrated in them. And I don't know, I just wanted you to speak more to that. What did you find in Christianity that you celebrated? What did you find in Buddhism that you celebrated that you didn't find emphasized as much in your own tradition?
Well, the whole discipline of practice, I think, is one of the more important things that I would say I could celebrate in Buddhism. I guess for me it's I came to appreciate the wildness of all the iconography. I don't like icons in the Christian tradition, actually. I don't ever use them. I find them a little too ethereal for me. But there's something about the colors in all of the iconography that it's so interesting. I see it and I feel at home. I feel very at home in Tibetan Buddhist situations. And I think it's just that I was so exposed for so long. And like that Vajradharu.
Vajradhara?
Oh, Vajradhara.
That's okay.
I've always had so much trouble with that word. I have to sound it out very carefully. And is that masculine, feminine, both?
Has an androgynous quality, but
Androgynous.
masculine.
Masculine, but androgynous quality. Okay. So I meditated in front of that. Let's just say I came to
call the primordial Buddha of our lineage. Yes.
Okay, I came to call him my blue Christ. That was so foreign to me at the beginning. But year after year, every August, every morning, every evening for a week, meditating there, I don't want to say I came to know him, but there just was this huge heart connection. Now that's really after having, just sort of gone like this when I first walked into that shrine room. And it's very profound for me still. I have this longing to be with that Thangka again, and just found out that
it's moved to a different spot.
It's moved to a different spot. For years, I would go back to that building, wanting to get in and see my blue Christ. Well, then, you know what else is interesting, and I only just recently thought of this. I didn't know it at the time, but Hildegard of Bingen, the great Rhineland mystic, had a vision which then was subsequently painted by someone as she described her visions, and Christ has a blue face. And David Evagrius, blue sapphire of the mind. So then one of the Desert Fathers, Evagrius, talks about the contemplative mind is the blue sapphire mind. So I found that so fascinating because, see, these traditions are, they're on this profound archetypal level.
Yes.
And if you can tap into that profound archetypal level, that speaks to all of us. And so that would be, there's a difference that I would celebrate, that I celebrated, and it's very powerful for me. You sent me a photo, which I still have, that I look at from time to time, and it's very moving for me.
And his blue, the blue of Vajradhara, is the blue of the autumn sky. So it evokes the sense of space.
I was going to say spaciousness.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now let me say that too. This was a huge opening for me. So at first I kept hearing, emptiness, emptiness, emptiness. And that was so confusing for me, and I do not know who said it. But one of you said it's spaciousness. Total big, big thing for me, spaciousness. And what that helped me understand is so when I lived in Crestone in a log cabin hermitage, looking east were those beautiful Sangre de Cristo Mountains, and the other way was the big San Luis Valley, open space. I always faced the open space, always. I only looked to the mountains, which were east, for the moonrise. That's it. Otherwise, I put my desk and I realized, because of the dialogues and because of that understanding of spaciousness, I realized that that's the essence of the desert, which I love, and that the reason I kept looking that way and always look that way is that my aspiration is that my inner being is as spacious as what I see out there. But if I hadn't, encountered that word spaciousness, that was just another awakening that is a result of the dialogues.
And that word emptiness is so misleading.
Yes, it is misleading.
There's a famous quote from Nagarjuna: "Those for whom emptiness becomes a concept are deemed incurable."
Yeah, well, it sure helped me to understand it as space. And then I was experiencing that. I knew that was part of my experience. And I mean, for Teresa of Avila, her image is that of the interior castle. And she speaks of 7 mansions, and you keep going inward into one mansion and then another mansion. It's kind of like Russian dolls, except it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Or it's like in the Chronicles of Narnia. I won't explain it. You either know it or you don't. When you go into the stable, the inside is bigger than the outside, is the big line that runs through that final book in the Chronicles of Narnia. The inside is bigger than the outside, and that was my experience. I learned a lot of language too. That's another thing. Another thing I would celebrate is that I learned a very different language, and I learned how to. Not that I speak it that well, but there were just a lot of things like spaciousness. In Christianity, we never use the word lineage. Now, of course, I can't think of other things, but I learned how to talk differently in a way that made what I had to say about the Christian mystical tradition more accessible to people by using some of the language that I learned in the dialogues. So that'd be another thing for me.
I could say things about celebration as well, I guess. Having been raised Christian, my father was a Methodist minister and didn't have much familiarity with Catholicism until I was a graduate student. To meet Christians like the contemplatives we invited to the conference was really amazing. And to meet such a diverse array of authentic contemplatives from the Christian tradition was really delightful. It was very clear to me that I was Buddhist, I was not Christian, but I developed a deeper connection and appreciation for Christianity again. I did not have bad experiences with Christianity, I just didn't have deep ones. Mm-hmm. And so I had lots of questions and a very deep spiritual yearning that Buddhist practice filled for me. But there was a certain color and texture that came from meeting Christian contemplatives that allowed me to really make a closer relationship with my own upbringing, but from the point of view of my own Buddhist practice, which had met the spiritual yearning in a way that Christian practice had not. So I celebrated that, and I celebrate that about having met you, but each of the contemplatives, Christian contemplatives who came to our dialogues. So other comments? Yes, please.
Oh, here's Leah.
Oh, please.
Not as tall as Sean. I'm Leah.
Hello, Leah.
When you spoke with us on Tuesday, you also mentioned that you were from an immigrant Polish family, and hearing today that when you went to church, it was just in Polish and Latin. I'm curious, I'm sure there was English around in your life in other places, and I'm curious about a little bit more about your relationship in discovering what's beautiful about Christianity through the absence of English. I'm Jewish, and there's a lot of that, absence of English in Jewish prayer too. We do a lot in Hebrew, and then a lot of times, kids will grow up, they'll have their bar mitzvahs and be like, what does that really say? And they'll see it and be like, oh, that's not what? And so I'm curious if that had a similar effect with you.
That's great.
Yes, and now everything was Polish or Latin, which didn't mean I didn't understand it. First of all, you do learn what the Latin means. The Polish was the sermon and announcements. The liturgy was Latin at that time, but you did know what it meant in English because you followed along. But it was the feel that I got, because I wasn't just reading along in English, following what was happening. I was just absorbing it on another level. It was more feeling. The other thing is in my early life, I wouldn't have understood what we mean by energies, but a lot of the people there had suffered a lot in World War II, under the communists. So the faith of Polish people, it's changed now since the fall of communism, but the faith was very, very strong. It was almost palpable. And so I was going to liturgy with all of these immigrants who had suffered and who had been through something that I hadn't. The faith was so powerful that it's like I was carried by it. And I did then, much later, I had the opportunity to go to Poland, and I went to the most important shrine, which is Our Lady of Częstochowa. And oh my goodness, there it was exponentially stronger than I had known growing up. So I felt like the ancestors, it was the blood was speaking. And all through my childhood, it was the blood speaking. So that it wasn't so much the words. The other thing, I will mention this from childhood. My youngest brother was a Down syndrome child, and who then died of leukemia when he was 8 years old. And we could never go to church together as a family. So my mother used to go alone on Sunday mornings while my dad took care of my youngest brother. I'm sure she was very relieved to have that time alone. And then my dad would take all of us. And the only time I ever went to church with my mother was, I'm not going to try to explain this, but it was a particular practice. I would have said devotion, practice, that's another word I learned from I never would have said practice before meeting Buddhists. The first Fridays of the month, you went to communion every first Friday of the month for 9 months, and you got special blessings. And it's the only time I ever went to church with my mother. And then we would get to have donuts and hot chocolate in the car on the way to school because we were late. And I just remember once after communion just peeking over at her. And she was wrapped in prayer. And again, the feeling of that, the feeling of it, wow, it had a huge impact on me. For every first Friday of the month, over and over for I don't know how many years of my life. And then when I later learned about contemplation and mysticism, I just remember one day saying, wow, I think Mom was a mystic. No? So that had a just huge impact on me. Huge impact. Is that true for you too?
Hi, my name is Gina. I'm here as a guest. My daughter invited me. She's a student here at Naropa. I've never been here before, so I'm delighted to be here. And I just wanted to share an experience because you talk about, your feeling nature and how important experience is. I was married 38 years, and I have 3 children and 7 grandsons. And when my children were 12, 10, and 7, it was 1992. My middle son had a misdiagnosed strep that settled into his kidneys. My husband had lost his job. We were slowly going broke because of medical expenses, and my middle son almost died. And that was March 10th of 1992. You can see it still has an effect on me in my cellular memory. Mm-hmm. And so he got better. Long story short, it was the fall of 1992, and I was able to get all the children off to school. And it was September 2nd, 1992. I sat in my recliner chair that I called my meditation chair, and I wrote the meanest, angriest, most vile letter to dear God within me. I have no idea how I knew to write to that specific presence within me, but I talk about experience. I vomited anger. I vomited vile, hostile, just toxic emotion that had been weighing me down. And once I got that all on paper, I just bawled my eyes out. And that experience opened me up. It cracked me open to opportunities for doors to open spiritually that have helped me become whole and full and just such an advocate of love. So experience is where it's at.
Yes.
Where it's at.
Yes.
Yes, where it's at.
Yes, thank you so much for that.
Yes.
See, we're going to talk about this tomorrow at some point, crisis contemplation, that we tend to think that this contemplative experience has to be quiet because of certain practice. And if,
Or sweet.
Or sweet. And if contemplation is loving experiential awareness of God, well, it could be in just like you described. And that is a contemplative experience. That's not separate from it. So that's a perfect example. I'm also aware that it was 9292 when you said it. That's kind of...
It was a moment of liberation.
Liberation, absolutely. And that's one of the fruits of the experience. Freedom and liberation. Yeah. And it's visceral. Yeah.
Like giving birth.
Yeah. And you did. You gave birth to yourself.
Yeah. Now I'm a competitive ballroom dancer, and I experience a lot of contemplation through joy.
That's it. That's it. And tomorrow we're going to talk about joy. We're going to talk about crisis contemplation and then joy. So yes, both. And St. Teresa was a big dancer. So I'm all for dancing contemplation.
We have a question here. Did you still have it? And then you, and then I think that will be our last one.
Thanks. Yeah, so maybe you started answering this question with that last response, but in Holy Daring, something that caught my eye in here is when you say prayer is to the human heart what breath is to the body. And then you quote Kierkegaard saying, if we don't breathe, we die. If we don't pray, we die spiritually. So thinking about that in the context of these dialogues, and maybe this is kind of a paradoxical question to ask, but I'm curious if any like secular approaches were ever hypothesized between the Buddhist-Christian dialogues to bring prayer to a secular society. If that, does that question make sense?
Did you? I'm not quite sure I got the question.
Well, maybe it's. I started by saying maybe it's paradoxical because thinking that we need some sort of form in which to engage in prayer.
That's secular.
But I guess a curiosity about these dialogues that I have is, between the two traditions, did anything ever arise that maybe was hypothesized to be applied to greater society, which of course is more and more secular all the time, or less religious, I should say. All the time.
And by secular, are you meaning anything like interspiritual or completely outside of any realm of spirituality?
Both.
Both.
And
okay.
well, in the way that our society is is less religious, more spiritual, and often I think the way that I see that is that there's less, there's maybe an aspiration for spirituality, but there isn't the form that's given to it in either of these traditions. So.
I can say that our Masters of Divinity students at Naropa are training to serve people in their spiritual needs outside of environments that we call themselves spiritual. And so lots of our MDiv students are having the experience of working with people in crisis who are for the first time discovering a yearning or a need in themselves that they would call spiritual, that they would never connect to institutional anything. And that so much of the kind of training we're doing with MDiv students is about how to speak outside of institutional anything to the spiritual longings and needs of whoever is having them. Because that's what's happening in crisis situations all through our world. When people run into big obstacles, health-wise or psychologically or circumstantially, they need pastoral counseling, and usually from people who aren't connected to institutions of any kind. So that's extremely important. And I think the interspiritual movement is really addressing some of that, but even beyond that, the Masters of Divinity programs throughout the country are producing people trained in pastoral counseling who are providing spiritual care by just hanging out a shingle, because no one wants to go into a church or a meditation hall. They want someone who they can sit down with without the trappings of commitments and creeds and such. Is that what you're talking about? Yes. And I think you're right that this is what we need to be doing. I'm very proud of our MDiv program, and we're part of a network of MDiv programs that are training interfaith chaplains who are going into secular environments, helping people with this kind of crisis that a psychologist is not going to be able to address. A lot of people go to psychologists for that, but they leave without really coming to the place where the spiritual longing is addressed. So, yes, I think it's a growing need, and I'm very proud that Naropa is working with that, as well as a number of other MDiv programs that we work with.
And I would say, so I'm here, we're talking about the Christian-Buddhist dialogue, so I'm being very Christian here. But my main interest is just the fundamental human thing. So there are all these Buddhist overlays, there are these Christian overlays, but basically we are all human beings, and there are fundamental elements of all of this that's just human. Yeah. It isn't this or that. And I'm going to talk about that tomorrow. I'm going to talk about, here's the contemplative life, here's like 10 elements of it, and it's just about living life and being a human being. So, and I think that's really what all of us are talking about. Yeah. And that's the common denominator. What unites us, we're all human beings. and we all have the same basic experience. Thomas Merton said, contemplation is life. And I'll be emphasizing that tomorrow. It's all this other stuff is extra. It's just part of the color. It's part of the flavor of it. But it's just fundamental humanness.
Yeah.
And that's where we need to go. It's just basic humanness. That's the common denominator.
Yeah. Thanks for asking that question.
But time for a commercial. There are books out back there. And there are brochures. I'd like you to pick up just something. Our little newsletter is called Caravans. That's where you get my correct address. Pick up the little Rumi card. The address is wrong, but you'll love the picture. Okay.
First, how are you two doing up there, just right now?
Energized by you.
When you opened the floor to questions, the first thing that came up in me was the similarities between Christ and the Bodhisattva. But I wondered why that was important to me. And then I remembered that I've been working with something a friend told me, which was just meditate like Christ on the cross. He felt nothing but love. I don't know if I just wanted to throw that on the table.
That's lovely.
Well, I think you
yes,
said
and
it.
there have been lots and lots of dialogues and books and papers and such contemplating the ways in which Christ is a bodhisattva and which bodhisattvas are Christ. So that kind of resonance, I think, we find. Obviously, there are some important differences as well, but the resonance of those traditions points to a certain level of common humanity about heart and wisdom going together, and about service being a natural expression of heart and wisdom going together. And so they came out in different cultural idioms and styles, but there's that really does speak to the humanity question that we were talking about earlier. So thanks so much for bringing that forward at this point.
Can you name a book that talks about
Well, there's one called The
bodhisattvas?
Christ and the Bodhisattva by Stephen Rockefeller, and
Oh,
it's a
Stephen
collection.
Rockefeller,
It's a
okay.
collection of essays of people. It's an old book, but I have
Old books are good.
They're good. Yes, and this one is a series of reflections by Buddhists and Christians on the similarities between Christ and the Bodhisattva. So that's the first one that came to mind. But there are lots of things that people have reflected, and I think it's out of some kind of desire to find across difference these kind of common human themes that may be addressed in these slightly different ways, but that resonance is, I like the resonance because it means that we're not just saying the same and we're not just saying different, but resonant. And I think that's at the core of it.
I want to ask a last question. I'm Nathaniel Miles Yepes, and I teach the interreligious, interspiritual dialogue course that Judith created here. And for both of you, this was really your first experiences of dialogue.
Yes.
Where did you go next? How did it unfold for you?
For me, and this is part of the story that I didn't share, but it started a whole journey through the Naropa dialogues. But because of the Naropa dialogues, I also learned about other dialogues that I was invited to join. For 23 years, I was part of a Buddhist-Christian theological dialogue group, an international group that met every 18 months in a different part of the world with, on the Christian side, the theologians who I had studied in graduate school, and I was scared to death of them. And I was also, the youngest, and felt very green. And I was drafted because I was a woman. When they formed the group, they had no women. And they said, oh, yeah, there's this woman from Naropa. Let's have her come. So I was part of that, and that was very powerful. I also became through that group, part of the Society of Buddhist-Christian Studies, which I've been a member of since 1983, and and served in a variety of roles. I also was invited to join the Gethsemane dialogues at Gethsemane Monastery in Kentucky, and because of this connection with Merton, and because Trungpa Rinpoche and Merton had a very special connection, I was part of a whole series of dialogues around the life of Thomas Merton, and became a guest a number of times from the Merton Society to speak about Buddhism in Merton and how all of that worked. And then it sort of led to a book on Benedict's Dharma, a Buddhist commentary on the rule of Saint Benedict, and that became a very interesting, so it led to a whole lot of activities and other kinds of dialogues. I have to say, as Tessa was saying, that most of them lack the kind of intimacy and personal quality of the Naropa dialogues. The theological dialogues were very sophisticated intellectually, but it did include the same group of around 30 people who met for 15 years. So, but most of the people there never moved beyond the intellectual. So it was very interesting. I learned a lot. But the Naropa dialogues had a very special quality because of Rinpoche's vision of a personal dialogue and of practice being primary and theory being second. And that most dialogue groups don't have the guts to go for practice or experience first. They start with the intellect. So I feel incredibly grateful that my first experience with this kind of dialogue had that particular mark. And to meet people like Tessa and the others who I met at those dialogues who had become friends for decades as a result of the intimacy of our connections.
Yeah. My experience was nowhere near as illustrious. Well, it's funny you should be asking, because what's my experience? It's with you and your groups. I mean, so because Nathaniel has organized dialogues that I think are even more intimate than what we did at Naropa.
It helps not to have an audience.
Yes, no audience, and enough time, like at least 5 days, so you can really get into it. And also, when you're living in the same place, eating meals together, very important, because a lot of the most important exchanges happen outside the formal situation. I would say more of my experience is just being at home and having people visit, or just going out and talking to people. It's just on a more natural level, apart from the work I've done with you, which has also been significant.
So we thank you for your ongoing catalyst work, bringing people together for dialogue. So Nathaniel. And thank you all so much for coming tonight. And I know you're going to have a dynamite weekend. And thank you, Tessa, for being here and continuing this kind of open-hearted connection with Naropa.
Oh, just love it. Love Naropa.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. And for those of you that are registered for the class, we'll start again tomorrow at 9 a.m. With Tessa and the second component of this, which is called Seasons of the Soul. So thank you.